So thanks for joining, everyone. I'd like to welcome Justin and Jacob to our session tonight to talk to us about technical craftsmanship over Agile. I've known Justin for quite a few years, I guess. Justin was a really high contributor to the community in Sydney. I saw him at a lot of these sort of meetups and at some of the conferences around Sydney. And yeah, we've really had a lot of good stories coming from Wollongong, right, with Scalapay, hearing how they've been really successful. And it's a sort of company you don't hear about as much in Australia as I think parts of Europe. An interesting story how they found a niche over there as a fintech company coming out of Australia. So I think just hand it over to Justin and Jacob to introduce themselves as part of this, but would you all join me in welcoming Justin and Jacob? Thanks, guys.
Woo. Thanks, Rowan, and welcome everyone. Feel free to, if you want to, as we're going, I've got the chat up on the screen here. So if you do have a question and you don't want to, say or interrupt, feel free to pop it in, and I'll try and we can try and answer it, directly straight away. I'm more than happy to do that. But other than that, we'll just get started on the presentation. All right. So I guess I wanted to kick off. Well, I've got to go on the right screen. I wanted to kick off with a bit of a story. Why I guess this topic is, I think, so important for me. And it comes down to, I couldn't find any better picture than this one, I think, in terms of us tech nerdies loving Star Wars and just the craftsmanship that's gone into building this. And I've actually been very lucky in my career because I started as a developer in 1996, and I worked for a company called Nortel Networks, and they were a big Canadian telco. And the reason why I feel lucky is because even back then, from the very beginning, we were doing like good software, right? So the craftsmanship was basically built in. We were doing, a little bit of automation. We were writing, clean code. We were reading all the, the different, coding books that were out there, and probably in particular, Rob Martin's book on clean code. So, look, I just think it's really, really, an interesting topic as well, because I just do feel like that this is sometimes what people forget to think about. And I guess, that's what we're going to present today in terms of craftsmanship over Agile. So, it's like the manifesto. While Agile is important, we think that the items on the left are more important. So the technical craftsmanship is more important than Agile, but we'll go into both bits of how we do Agile, because that's quite unique as well. And Jacob is obviously a lead engineer here. He'll go into, more of the technical stuff. So yeah, and I guess even though I said that we were doing this sort of like craftsmanship a long, long time ago, the thing that hasn't changed, the way you do it's changed, but the habit hasn't changed. And I think that's the key word, is you have to make technical craftsmanship a habit. And I'm going to be saying that a lot in this session. So a little bit about myself. So I'm Justin Urbanski. I'm the engineering manager at Scalapay. I started off as a dev, went into management, found out about Agile, became an Agile coach, delivery lead, and then now I'm back doing like engineering management. But I'm really just focused on people and processes, as well as the tech and why it's so important. But everything that I learned in those years of just doing development for Nortel Networks, I basically just incorporate into every job that I do now, because I feel like that's often the missing piece. And then Jacob.
Yeah, cool. So I'm Jacob Irving, lead software engineer here at Scalapay. I remember, like, from as early as I can remember, I had a team lead who drilled clean code and the practices into me from my junior years. And yeah, I'm super thankful for him and like him teaching me that very early on. And it's helped me massively as I've continued on in my career. So super passionate about technical craftsmanship and how we as developers are stewards of what we deliver and how we can, yeah, like do that well so that we can assist with the Agile process. But I'll hand you back to Justin.
Cool. All right, a little bit about Scalapay. So Scalapay is a buy now, pay later platform. We operate in Southern Europe, mainly in Italy. So Scala in Italian actually means step. So it's like step payments. And the reason why it started in Australia, because both the founders were actually working in Australia, and then they saw a gap in the market and decided, hey, let's try and take this to Southern Europe. So we operate in, Italy, France, Portugal, Spain are the main ones, and there's a bit of Germany and a few others. But it is an interesting story because a lot of the engineering is done here in Wollongong. There's only like 35 of us here in Wollongong, and the bulk of the engineering is done here. And then the rest of the business is overseas. So that's how it works. But it works, really, really well. So the purpose of today is, regardless of your role, is I want to help you understand, why we value technical craftsmanship over Agile. Now at the conference, I asked everyone, what sort of role are you? But I'm sure there's a good mix of product owners, BAs, Scrum Masters, and I'll try and cover them all as we go. So just to quickly run you through what the ecosystem for Scalapay looks like. And sorry if you're not, technical minded, but I still think it'll make a lot of sense. This is a picture of what Scalapay was like 2.5 years ago. All right, it was very, very simple. We had our data layer, right? So a number of different types of, databases. We had one services package, which had a lot of common code in it. We had the, our public API to create orders that the merchants would call to create an order. We had client API, which is more for users, authentication, and the mobile app. And then a worker job, which essentially, did a lot of odd jobs that needed to be done. And then the front end applications, right? So we had the mobile app, the customer portal, merchant portal, and then our own internal admin tool. It was very, very simple, right? We talked to a few third-party apps, and mainly Stripe for payments. Everything was running on AWS from a DevOps side of things, and then Datadog was for logging, and it was pretty simple, right? I could run the whole of this, all of this, on my laptop, not a problem, very, very easily. But as we started to scale, we needed to re-architect things. But what I really want to talk about, I guess, is how we got to that point and why technical craftsmanship is so important. So in a nutshell, technical craftsmanship is the habit of continuously delivering quality solutions. So what does that mean? For me, there's three main things. The first one is just to keep things simple, right? You don't need to overcomplicate things. Keeping it simple always makes it easy for everybody to understand. The next one is clean code. So having, good coding standards, and, using design patterns and things like that. And then pretty much a huge amount of automation, right? We have a lot of automation, and I know it's easy for us to say because, the company's been around for maybe like 4 years when it was one person, two people. And now we're over 200. But the thing is like we started those practices right from the start. So we can test the whole of Scalapay in about an hour or two, and we ship, 3 to 4 times a week. We're trying to move closer to continuous delivery, but that'll be, a little bit later. So keeping it simple. I guess the first thing is for us, we've now moved to more of, a microservices or a domain-driven or event-driven architecture. And so there's a lot more repositories, but every code repository feels the same. So when you go from one code base into the next code base, and they're all talking through APIs, is they all feel the same. So it actually is quite enjoyable for developers, because they feel like when you go in there, you can see that, this looks quite familiar for me. I know this does a different job, but it looks very, very familiar, and I can, start coding straight away. Now, there's a lot of don'ts. And when I first created these slides, I sort of thought, well, why have I got so many don'ts in there? But I think it's actually a good thing, because a lot of engineers, they often over-engineer things, right? They want to gold plate everything. So that's the first thing, is like, there's a lot of times where you just don't need stuff, right? Just don't do it, right? It's waste, right? So it's really about trying to keep that focus. Don't code for the future. So developers often code like, we're going to need this in a month's time or 2 months' time, so I'll put it in now. And it's like, no, because the thing is things change, and that might not ever happen, and then you won't ever go back and clean up that code. So just don't do it. And then obviously, if you don't even reinvent the wheel. So if there's something out there, like a package or a bit of software that you can use, that's like, we're a JavaScript shop, so there's lots of NPM packages that you can use. And as long as they're safe, you just go and use them. Don't worry about trying to, build it yourself, because that's, again, just, wasting time. And the other one that I think is quite interesting is just, whenever we do something new, we always try to make sure that the developer experience is awesome. And the reason behind that is that we do want developers to be able to develop on their laptop. And we don't want developers to have to, build something and then put it onto a server and then, go and test it for the next 2 days or whatever, right? It's all about, they can just do it right there and right then. So they're going quite fast. So we always try and make sure that, even if we're integrating with like a third party, like payment service, like Stripe, it's like, well, how do we get around the whole, idea of, okay, we don't want to actually charge someone's credit card for real. And, there's obviously, test accounts and all this sort of stuff, but we're always thinking about that developer experience. In terms of clean code, so when you start at Scalapay, day one, you get a copy of this book, and, it's yours to keep forever. It's, somewhat our Bible, I guess, in terms of just, how to write clean code. And then obviously, there's a lot of teaching around that as well, because, we do, do a little bit of TDD. We do, when people are doing like pull requests in their code, people are giving feedback to people. They're, teaching juniors. So that's a good thing as well. We've got our own coding standards that we abide by. Design patterns. So design patterns are like a language. So it's like, if I said to Jacob, I think for that we should use, the state machine pattern, he would know exactly what I mean. Again, that's another thing that I think a lot of developers don't even know about, but they should learn, because there are a lot of patterns to solving different problems. Other patterns include things like the factory pattern, and help me out. Put him on the spot, and he's choked. There's like the decorator pattern and all these other patterns, and there's a whole book on that as well. But it's really, really important, right? Because it's like, again, why solve this problem, through object-oriented code, when you can actually just use a particular pattern that solves a problem. And then when developers know that pattern, they can go, oh, okay, yeah, I understand that. I know that pattern. It's a bit like, when you talk about Agile and you start talking about sprints and, backlogs and things like that. And people are like, what are you talking about? But, once everyone knows Agile, it's okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And then obviously test-driven development. So, writing tests first, and then writing the code is quite important as well, because, often you can, you write the code, then the test, and then what happens is you delete the code and the test still passes. So, but then there's also the refactoring side of TDD as well. That's important. Now, we don't follow it like on everything, like every single day and every single little thing here and there, but for TDD, that is. But we do focus on as much as we can. And then in terms of automation, this is probably like one of my favorite topics. And because I just think, like nearly everything's automatable, right? You don't want to automate things that, happen like once a year or is just going to be a huge amount of effort, like ridiculous amount of effort. But most of the time it is a first-class citizen for us. So developers are writing unit tests, they're writing integration tests, they're sometimes writing API tests. Then we've got our QA automation team that write the UI tests, like in Puppeteer, which is the equivalent of Selenium. Our infrastructure and DevOps is, again, just incorporated into our everyday work. We do have a team that does that for us, who've got that expertise, but a lot of the developers as well are, in the same boat. And again, we do like value stream mapping, where we try and think about, okay, where's the bit that's slowing us down the most? And if it is something related to how we deploy our code, then obviously we're going to talk to the DevOps team. We're going to figure something out and create some automation around that. So a typical developer experience really is, writing code, click a button, it gets deployed to a development environment. They can test it, or they can test it locally on their own laptop using some tools that we've developed. But then once it's ready to go, it really is just, click to merge into the appropriate, branch. And then it's pretty much nearly automated into like staging environments. And then we have a release process where we click that and off it goes. Again, pretty much one button, boom, into production, right? You don't have to worry about, have I followed the instructions correctly? Have I mistyped something? There's never any of that. It's just off it goes. So, and that leads into CI/CD, right? So again, that's important. So continuous integration, continuous delivery, whatever your flavor is, you've got to have something there. You just, it's all about feedback loops for me. So as a developer, I want to know in, a minute if I've got some failing tests at the unit level. Maybe it's, within 5 minutes at the integration level, maybe 10 minutes at the API level, maybe 20 minutes at the UI level. So, it's all about having those quick feedback loops, and that's what enables you to go really, really fast. And, in terms of just continuous improvement, again, it sort of doesn't come under automation, but I guess it does. But we're always looking at ways to, go faster and, automate different things. So I guess those principles, and it is at a very, very high level, what it did was it laid the foundation for everything that we then started doing at Scalapay, because we went from doing about, like 100,000, through our system per day to millions through our system per day. And these practices, from everything from, automation to clean code, really laid the foundation for us, scaling. And we're at now like, over, 7 million users. We get about 6,000 new users a day, and all those sorts of things add up in terms of being able to, scale. And, obviously the DevOps side of it is key as well, because our processes are now, are getting hammered, every single day. So I guess, yeah, it's just, it just laid a really good foundation for us. And this is what, I guess, Scalapay looks like now. So as we have started to scale, we've moved more towards a services-oriented architecture. And look, you don't need to see the details here, right? It's just really just trying to show you the scale that we're at now. Before, the services layer used to be an NPM package, which had got a lot of common code in it, for example. Now it's made up of like 15 to 20 services. And, so there's like a user payment service, there's a merchant payment service, there's, all these different services that have a specific job to do. And by having the foundation of the good technical practices, it made it easier for us to move towards this, right? Because we really could just take bits and pieces of it and go, okay, we're going to create this new service. It's going to be, a Node.js or a Nest app, and it's going to have this specific purpose, and we're going to move it from that common code, and we're going to use the APIs now. And now we've got other layers as well that we've utilized, and we do things like there's a lot more in the data layer as well. And we try and follow this as much as we can to keep it nice and structured, and to help, everybody understand, where we're going with our architecture and how we're going to, continuously improve. So there's a question up here, says, when is the right time to migrate to microservice so that it does not over-engineer your architecture? Look, I guess it probably comes down to, you sort of know when the service can't handle it anymore, because it's becoming like a real pain to figure out, well, okay, we've got this new feature that we want to do, and how are we going to update this huge, big maybe process that we've got, like, running, and it just becomes just so difficult. And then that process always then becomes the bottleneck. That's probably a good time to know that, okay, look, we need to start breaking this up, right? We need to start, utilizing, microservices. And then even then, like, we're not, I guess, doing microservices specifically as they're meant to be. We still have, we have a lot of services that might use like a DynamoDB or a, or the database through GraphQL, or, through another API. But I know there's a lot of people out there that will talk about microservices where, every single service has their own little database and this sort of thing. But look, this is what works for us. And it's, quite clean. And then when you do this, it's obviously easy to have different processes scale within AWS, for example, than having this huge monolith that has to keep scaling. And, we've moved to some of the services are Lambdas as well. So in terms of, yes, there's another question from Chris here about, as we've scaled, the services are compartmentalized. Have you dealt with stress load penetration testing? So yes, the way that we architected the different services was based off event-driven design. Is that right? Or domain? Was it event-driven design? Yeah. So a lot of the things that we thought about were, what are the events that happen, right? And then we ended up using within AWS, I can never remember the name, EventBridge, to post those events, and then the particular services then read those events and do their job if they've got a job to do. And with stress load penetration testing, our DevOps team is just incredible when they've been able to do that. But we do performance testing. Well, let me address two things. Penetration testing, we do get an external company to do like the penetration testing, and then obviously give us the feedback, and then we have to fix things. But they've come back with maybe like 2 or 3 things. We've been very good on that front. But stress and load testing, yes, we actually do like, probably our biggest day of the year is Black Friday, which is, around the end of November. We're doing some performance testing next month, because we want to know that our system's going to be able to handle, Black Friday. Because I think the first time I was here, Black Friday was like 1 million. Then last year it went to like 2.4 million. And then now we do 2.4 million on a daily basis. So it's like, I don't know what the target is this year, but it could be something like, I don't know, 10 million or something in one day. But anyway, definitely you've got to do something, right? And, that's where our QA team and our QA testers, they are actually writing automation tests. They're not really doing like manual testing at all. They'll do a little bit here and there, but the bulk of their work is they're actually coding. And I'm taking way too long, so I've got to go faster. Software quality metrics. Yeah, we do. The one that I count probably the most, we're actually going to start introducing Sonar and Sonar Cube, just to get some, better, like a grand view of everything, now that everything's in, there's like 30, 40 repos that you sort of have to, it's too many to be able to go in individually and go, okay, is the quality of this one good or this one bad? So it'll give us a holistic view. It's not like a big stick, because I'm just not like that. I don't want developers to think that we're, watching them all the time, because that's just not me. But the one that I do like to measure is bugs released into production. So not bugs that are found by the dev team, but bugs that have released into production. So specifically look at those and, whether they're going up or down. But I really want to hand over to Jacob, who's going to now talk about, the technical craftsmanship side in more detail.
Cool. Thanks, Justin. I did want to add just one thing on the penetration and load testing, more on the load testing side. Like, the benefit of going microservices is we can test with load at all layers, right? Like, we can test through the client layers and then see where it kind of starts to fragment or struggle, and we can boost and reduce things as we need. So that's been really beneficial for us. And our QA automation team is great at, hammering it and then telling us what's breaking so that we can try and fix it. So for me, technical craftsmanship, as I said up front, is something that I'm super passionate about. And I think as my career has progressed and as I keep progressing in my career, I see it as one of the things that's fundamental to, who I am, more so than, my technical ability or anything, but it's about the how and the why. And I think that's really important. So as I was thinking about this, the two kind of things that I thought shaped technical craftsmanship, and especially for us at Scalapay, and Justin's kind of alluded to both of them already, so they may not, jump out as a surprise, but standardization and the developer experience. So let's jump into those a little bit more. So standardization. So most of these Justin's already alluded to, but I'll dive in just a little bit deeper, not too much, just conscious of time. But yeah, every code repository feels the same. And Justin's alluded to some of the benefits of that. And like, it's been crucial for us on the occasion where something has gone out that is a bug or something. And, we're scrambling to work out what's gone wrong, or in the off chance where, someone's not available and we need to do something in a certain app, everyone's able to jump in and do it because it doesn't feel any different. Like, it's exactly what we expect. It's the same command to run the tests. It's just natural. It doesn't feel different. So it means that, everyone's able to jump in. What I did want to say, though, about this is, like, this isn't a hard and fast rule. It's really important when we're choosing technology to choose the right technology for the task at hand. And I think, like, it could be really easy to just say, like, no, this is the hard and fast rule. It has to always be like a Nest.js app. But then there's some problems that aren't meant to be solved in that way. So I think for the most part, keeping everything the same means that developers can jump in and solve the problems that they need to solve. But in the scenarios where you need to do like something different because it solves the problem in a better way, that's where documentation and I guess explanations of the why, and then also how to operate in those places, become really important. So that even though it's a little bit different, it's still like is easy to jump in. And obviously within those repositories, the methods, the practices, the standardization of principles of coding, like all that kind of stuff's still the same. So on the top level, everything's still the same. It's just a different underlying or fundamental. And then DevOps, similar to what Justin's already said, like super important to have DevOps just across the board the same. For me to want to deploy an app, like I don't want to have to look at the Bitbucket file or something else to work out how to deploy it. It should just be simple, right? Like, I want to deploy this app. Cool. I've committed my code. Look at the pipeline. Sweet. Deploy to this environment. I can test it. If it gets too complex, then that's just not helpful. And even more so as we go through, I'll talk about data and why data is important. And capturing data from these apps and the logs and everything else is super important to standardize so that it's not something you have to think about. It just happens. So for us, our base image that we build on already wraps all the natural console logs and pumps them straight into Datadog. So we don't have to think about, handling logs any differently. It's just done. And then we can access all our logs straight out of the box, which is awesome. This next one, I always, hesitate slightly before saying it, but we will never ship shit. And that seems really obvious, right? Like, why would you choose to do that? Doesn't make sense. But we just do it all the time. Well, not all the time, but it seems like something that's so easy to do. And it can be because of deadlines or because of, not knowing any better potentially, but all that stress that we feel on ourselves. And I think it's really important for us, especially here at Scalapay, like that's the culture. Pull requests, it's not a personal attack or anything, but it's the time to call things out and work through things. Ultimately, we should do it earlier if we can, if we're having that conversation with each other. But definitely when it comes to pull request time, like, we don't let that stuff go out, because if it goes out, then it creates a standard and it's normal, and then it expands and more people do it, and then the whole code base is shit, which just isn't great, right? But I wanted to touch a little bit further on this in terms of something I've been thinking about a lot lately with my product owner. Often we talk about unused code as bad, like it's not clean. So I'd put it into the shit category. But what about unused features? What do they do? So for us at Scalapay, we've really taken the approach of testing everything. So when we have a new feature that comes in, we test it. We think about how we can test it today, how we can test it within the hour, how we can test it within the week, to make sure that we're delivering the right feature. And then even that feature, that we're delivering it the right way. Because we can read a customer's feedback or a request that comes through from a merchant and say, yep, we know how to build that, let's build it. But we still might build the wrong thing, because sometimes they don't tell you exactly what was the problem. They just tell you what they think is the problem and how it can be solved. So I think for me, as I continue through my career, I'm starting to put the features that are unused, or the parts of features that are unused, into that category. The unused code, essentially, because no one cares about them and no one wants them, but then someone has to maintain them. And that's just, more for me that falls into that category. I also added address failing or fragile tests. This is the pain of every developer. If the tests are failing or fragile, it slows down everyone, not just the one developer, but anyone who has to engage with that application. Because if I don't know that the tests are fragile or are potentially intermittent, I'll write something in that code base and I'll run the tests and it'll fail. So I'll debug, try and work out what's going on, and then I'll rerun it again to see if it still works, and then it'll pass. And then, why did it fail? Was it my code? Did I introduce this? Was it something else? It's really distracting to the team. Like, one, for confidence in what we're releasing, because maybe it's intermittently passing instead of intermittently failing. That's not great either. But in terms of, I guess the priority of that, like, it became a massive priority for us to make sure that our test harnesses are solid, so that we can have confidence in what we release, and that, our developers aren't second guessing or wasting time debugging why it's failing when it's not actually anything they've changed. And I've got there as the last thing for standardization, the Boy Scout rule. And I'm assuming most people have heard of that, but essentially the concept is leave the place better than when you found it. And I think that the time that this makes the most sense is when you're thinking about how or what feature you're about to work on next, and you're thinking about the area that you're going to have to touch to write that code. If you feel scared or that code has been written a long time ago, it's important to go in first and write tests around the existing functionality and then refactor, so that when it comes to making the change to the feature or the addition of the feature, it's a small change, there's good confidence, and no one gets stressed about what could potentially happen. Because, I think, as we all know, the general principle with old code is don't touch it. And the general principle with refactoring is it's going to break something. So if we get into old code, test it, and then refactor it, we can make sure that we do it the right way without potentially introducing bugs. So that's kind of the standardization approach, I guess, or like grouping of ideas. And then let's jump into the developer experience. So access to data, I'll touch on a little bit more, but I just wanted to call it out as really important to the developer experience. But I'll jump into that in a second. Oh yeah, sorry, I'll jump into questions. Yes. Have you adopted code tags so that you can enable new features for customers in prod on code that was released 1 month ago? Yes, but we don't necessarily do it so much. I guess the way we do it, like, we have our own experimentation tooling, which we use internally, and we will more do it that way. But it's never, I don't know, we never have it sitting there for long enough. Like, the 1 month ago is what's scaring me about that question, I guess, because when we put it into production, we're testing it that day. Like, we're starting to roll things out to 1% of users or to a select group of users that we want to test this product. And if it doesn't work or there's something wrong with it, we're iterating on it that day. As soon as we have any indicator on what's wrong, we're starting to progress on that, or we're having conversations about what could be going wrong there, what's the potential problem. But yeah, like we use flags to turn certain things on and off for different users so that we can test that stuff, because that's really important, right? That's how we get our answers without, shipping something to everyone and hoping it works. It means we can, bring it down to a smaller minority and really test its effectiveness. And then yes, shipping waste in addition to shit. I should change it. I'll change it for next time. Cool. Jumping into the developer experience. How do you get a sense of what the customer doesn't want? Wow, that's a good question. Yeah, analytics is our biggest tool, I guess. And Justin said it off screen. He said analytics straight away as soon as I read out the question. Like having a good analytics funnel, and this is what I'll touch on with the access to data, is really important. Because if we put something out but can't measure its effectiveness or its success rate or whatever else, then there's no point in putting it out in the first place, whether it's a complete feature or not. There's no way for us to determine whether it was the right use of time, the right use of resource, the right anything, because we never determined how we can measure that goal. And measurability is massive, right? Being able to measure everything is what allows us to check the success or even give us gratification on why we came to work that day. Because if I can't tell if what I'm doing is actually helping, what's the point? Like that's why I want to do my job, right? I want to help users to have a better experience. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. I guess the more finite answer to it is having clear objectives before you start, so that you can know what to measure to work out if it's working. But yeah, cool. Developer experience. So access to data, again, touch on it a little bit. We'll touch on it more. Super important. Local Docker. So this is kind of, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Docker and what it does. But essentially for us, it's a tool that allows us to spin up the entire stack on our local machine without having to open every monorepo repository, every microservice repository, and run it individually. It allows us to pull the latest image off what is our develop branch, which is, pre-prod, into our local, and then we can just run the few apps that we need to work on actually locally. This is massive for us because, as Justin kind of showed earlier, we have a ton of apps now. And to know about every app that's operating and what environment variables I need and whether to pull the latest release or all that kind of stuff, it's just not going to happen. We're going to be wasting so much developer time and frustration in developers to try and get the local environment working that people aren't going to even get it done by the end of the day. So this was really important for us as we grew and expanded so much, that we kept the developer experience at the core of what we do and the decisions we made in terms of what was the next step. So that's, I guess, for us, the tool that works. Automated test stack. Justin's talked about this a lot already. Like we have, unit test, integration test, system test, client test, API test. Like we test across the stack, and that's for our own, I guess, selfishness in wanting to know that what we've shipped works. But it also gives us good confidence when we're changing things. It allows us to move quickly because we know that what we changed hasn't broken something else over here. Because that's often in code what happens, right? Like we follow best practices, we don't duplicate code, but then that means that code over here can affect code over there. And if we don't have the test to make sure that everything's still working as expected, we can't have confidence that we can make that change without affecting everything else over there. And if we were to manually test all that, that's a long time, right? To manually test everything to the point where we can be confident in what we're releasing is just not going to happen in a way that's going to allow us to move quickly. We are a team. Sounds simple, obvious, right? But it's important because sometimes it's very easy to operate in a silo, to pick up a ticket or a piece of work, go about it, finish it off, bring back, and that's it, right? You should put it for code review, and I don't know, it'll be looked at soon, and hopefully everyone thinks it's okay, and off it goes. It's really important that, as we kind of talked about earlier, we have the conversations early. If there's something we're doing that we're not 100% sure about, don't just put it in a code review and someone will pick it up in a comment if they want. ask the question, have the conversation. What's the best way of solving this? Have you solved something like this before? Is there something that we already have in place? That's going to be really important. But even more so, like, I think especially for me and my team, like, I'm primarily a front-end developer, and I have guys who are less experienced and more experienced in different areas. And it's been really important for us to continue to develop each other in the different, I guess, disciplines of our craft, so that if I take leave or someone else takes leave, or there's a job that needs to be done, but I'm busy, anyone can jump in and is fully capable of doing that job, including, like, at the moment, one of the guys on my team who's a developer has jumped fully into QA automation engineering, just because we have a massive feature, right? And that's what's required. The development effort was quite minimal, but the testing effort to cover all the iterations, because of all the countries we support and everything else, is quite large. So we've jumped in, we said, cool, what's the blocker? What needs to change? How can we deliver this feature? And for us, it was, okay, we need to have more tooling and more people around the QA automation and less around the development side. So that's just, I guess, the fundamentals of, just being a nice guy and being willing to jump in and help is the simplest way of solving it. But often it's very easy not to do that, right? To just sit back and do my job or do what I need to do and stay in my silo. And then clean code, again, like, don't code for the future, don't over-engineer. And TDD. TDD is always an interesting one and can sometimes be a little bit controversial maybe. But I think one of the places that I've found it the most useful is when you're fixing a bug. And it happened once in my team, and this is how I knew that the team was, progressing well. One of the guys, like, we found a bug and we were talking about it in stand-up. And one of the guys goes, I'll write the test. And someone else said, I'll fix the bug. And then we could just bring it all together at the end and say, okay, well, we have a failing test. It's failing. Good. We now know that that test is testing this bug. And then we shipped the code that should fix the test into the development environment. And all of a sudden the test went green. It was like, cool, TDD, done. And that's really important, right? Because sometimes we make mistakes, and that's okay. We're human. There's going to be bugs in production. But making the same mistake twice, well, that's when it becomes a little bit more, how are we making sure we're doing our job properly? How are we protecting ourselves and our customers and our users from seeing the same mistake twice in production? Because I think, like, most users are pretty okay if you make, a small bug that interrupts their day. But if they see it fixed and then broken again a month later, that is the most frustrating bug they've ever seen. So let's jump into the access to data. I think there's two things that access to data gives us. And the first one is decision making. And I've talked about it a little bit already around, like, how do we get a sense of what the customer wants and doesn't want? But I've got a quote there, and this came straight from our product owner. He said, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And that's good, right? Like, that's the approach we should have, because making the right decision is hard, because we all have our own opinion of what's right. And especially as we look at, software and user experience and all these kind of things, there's always more than one right answer, or one, answer that could solve the problem. And it's important that we're validating and testing and actually trying things so that we can see, what data says about what our users want. And again, that all comes down to what we're measuring. So for us, like, my team's primarily in charge of the checkout flow and getting users in and out the door, really. So for us, it's friction points, making sure that there's no confusing UX flows, and then making sure, that everything's just working as expected, and that, there's a button that isn't hidden. They're able to look at it as they expect, because that's always the problem, especially on mobile. The button's just below the fold and they're not scrolling down to find it. But it's important to look at all this stuff and find out what we've been doing. Cool. Thanks, Rowan. And then debugging. So even more important, arguably, or potentially not so, our ability to debug is important, right? Because once the code is in the user's hands, they know about it and they know the problems. So before we give it to them, it's okay to have a little bit more time to work out what's going wrong. But once they've got it, it's important for us to fix as soon as possible. And for us, that's where debugging and our access to data to debug is everything. As I kind of mentioned earlier, like, we have all our logs going to Datadog, and that allows us to see across all of the apps what happened and where did it happen, and why did it happen and what went wrong where. And especially coming back to that standardization across the board of apps, like I've been in situations before where I've needed to jump in and find a bug in somewhere I've never touched before, but I can find a log that's telling me exactly what's wrong and what needs to change. I can jump into the app, I can make that change. We can ship it into a dev environment, run our tests, make sure that we haven't broken anything, and be confident to release it and fix it. And that's really important, right? Like it's important for us to have visibility of what our users are doing and seeing, because if we don't know what bugs they're running into, then we're only going to hear from the small amount of users who ring up support and tell them, which isn't everyone. Not all users will do that. So it's important for us to know what's happening for the user and be able to catch those bugs before they even know it's a bug, and be able to fix it in time. Cool. So why technical craftsmanship? Reducing time spent fixing, debugging production issues. Pretty clear, right? From what we've just talked about, like access to data, simplification of our code bases, allowing anyone to do anything and jump in. Anyone being able to do any part of the job. Again, that team mentality, right? Training each other up, making sure that we're happy to jump in and help, because at the end of the day, it's not about, how nice this one feature I built did. It's about how as a team we're shipping things and how that's affecting the customer. Leading indicators of when things aren't performing as expected, all about data, right? Analytics, how are we seeing our users interact with this feature? Is it performing well? Do they even like it? Like, was it worth our time? How can we know that? And then our ability to move quickly and pivot. If we have our tests in place and we have confidence in that, we can change anything and ship because we know it's working, right? There's no fear, there's no scared of breaking something else somewhere else, because we know that everything we've written is tested and reliable, and then we can move forward and without worrying about breaking things, and allows us to move faster. But I'll hand you back over to Justin.
All right. Any further questions at this stage? Which I'll try and go through this really quickly. So this is probably what some people might be interested in more so, but in terms of the way that we do Agile, is, I guess, selfishly, as being a coach previously, what I try to do is focus a lot on principles over the specifically Scrum. But this is what works for us, and I think it's something that people might want to steal bits from. Essentially, we came up with this idea called seasons, and it's based off Basecamp's, shape up model. If you want to go and read about that, but essentially it's a 6-week cycle. The first week is planning week. And I guess the first thing is it's all about making like a season, is we ask teams to ship a feature in a season, right? So when they look at it, they can go, yes, we think we can deliver that feature in a season. It's small enough to fit within the 6 weeks. And it doesn't mean that we then start waterfalling seasons, right? They've still got to have deliverables, throughout the whole season. So we do try and focus on teams when they're planning to make sure that they have certain milestones, that they deliver working product. Week 0, we tend to kick things off with a big inception session, which is 2 hours long. We do a season retro with all the teams, because we've got about 6 or 7 Agile teams in Wollongong, and then about another 4 or 5 in Italy. We then do an inception where we talk about all the features that are upcoming. And then we do the teams just start doing discovery and planning throughout the whole week. And then at the end of the week, teams during this period might do a team retro. And then at the end of the week, we do a commitment ceremony. So it's a bit like, a shortened version of maybe PI planning, where we're planning across all different teams, and I'll show you our Miro board that we use to plan across all the different teams. But then at the end of that week, we're always pretty confident that everything that every single team has said, we're all going to make sure that we deliver the whole lot. So then at the start of every week, we do a weekly alignment with everybody in a big meeting, again, just to align on where things are at, any blockers, any risks, things like that. The team might do another team retro midway, maybe, but most of the time I think we normally just do one a season these days. And then we start thinking about the next season. We've actually changed this now. We're actually doing it earlier. We're actually doing it from about week 2 to week 3, and then we do some solution designing and things in week 4 and 5 to get ready for the next season. So there's a bit of a build phase, and then like the planning phase, which probably is more of the product owners and the leads type thing. And that's pretty much it for that's the real basic version of it. We're into season 22 now. We actually, all the terms that we use ended up going towards a basketball analogy. And so we have rebound week, which is week 5 now, which teams tend to use for technical debt. And then, we've got the idea of a draft pick. So if that's a feature that might go into a season, but the whole company's using it now. And, we feed our OKRs into this as well. And we're always continuously refining it. One change that we've made just recently is that the teams have to now be finished by week 4 so that they can do their rebound week in week 5. Because otherwise it just tends to, then everything tends to roll into the next season. It just wasn't working right. And we had to make some changes. But our Miro board sort of looks like this across all the different teams. And again, it's a very high level view of where are things at? What are the features that you're working on? When did you deliver it? When are you expecting it to deliver it? There's, people put stickers on for priority things and, all sorts of different things. The boxes mean that they're shipping something that date, but then the feature won't be ready until the checkered flag is there. And again, you can draw lines between these things to just understand if there's any dependencies, but it's really just a high level view. Because one thing that, we don't estimate in story points. The way we estimate is we tend to have these features and the team looks at it, and during that planning week is they understand the features and they call out any issues, and they also call out if it's too much, they're not going to take something on board, or we'll descope. And that's how it works for us. And it just works really, really well. Like I said, we've been doing it for 22 seasons now. There was a question about, do you have Agile coaches, Scrum Masters to help with the non-technical side of your work? We don't have any of those. I guess we don't have Scrum Masters. We're probably lucky enough that we've got a lot of people that have been doing Scrum for many, many years. And I think it's one of those things. I think there was even a talk recently where someone was talking about how have we, outgrown the role of a Scrum Master. Maybe that's something for another time. But I've been an Agile coach as well. So what I tend to do is I tend to try and just lay down the principles of, why you have a stand-up and, why we plan and, the different levels of planning that we do versus, being strictly tied to Scrum. So in Jira, we use weekly sprints for each of the different weeks. But again, we're not really, focused on that so much over, getting features done and the craftsmanship side of things to enable us to just get those features done. So then I guess, because I've got both the Agile coach and the technical side of things, I probably I'm able to balance that and, do whatever it takes or whatever the team needs for me to be able to just, help them out. So then there was a question around, you mentioned you don't estimate in story points. Do you estimate at the feature story level, perhaps in days? Nope, we don't do any of that. Look, our CTO really hates estimating, right? He, I guess he just finds it's always a waste of time, right? Because estimates are never correct. And, one of the things that I learned, and one of the sayings that I have is, what is it again? I've forgotten. See, I choked again. I choked as well. Yeah, I'll come back to it. Anyway, it doesn't matter how much estimating you do, it just never works, right? And so if we can see it on a board, like that Miro board, and we literally have it up on the screen, we used to use a wall, but now there's too many people that are, in different parts of, everywhere, and remote working and all that sort of stuff. But when people can look at it and go, I believe that we can get that done, then everyone's happy. And we do look it up as well, the fist of 5, which is the confidence vote, right, across everybody. And if anyone puts a low score, we have to talk to them, or they have to raise their issue, and we either mitigate it or address it, within, the teams or the leads, and we figure it out. But we literally just don't do, anything on that front. But you've got to remember that, we're getting close to the 6:30. So, yep. All right. Look, to finish off, I guess there is a healthy tension between, the technical craftsmanship and seasons. And they sort of, that's why we ended up, creating this presentation, because I think, you've got your planning cadence with the seasons every 6 weeks. We're doing OKRs that are now every quarter or every 6 months now. The technical craftsmanship side, though, is what allows us to be able to fit a feature into a season, right? If we didn't have the technical craftsmanship, we would not be able to fit the features into a season. And that's what makes it work, because the features are literally very big features. And, because we can test the whole product in, 2 hours, that's what enables us to go really, really fast. So just to finish off, technical craftsmanship, I believe, has to be a habit, and that's what it is, right? None of us here write code without writing a unit test. It just doesn't happen. And that's when it becomes a habit, right? You get out of bed in the morning, you get dressed, brush your teeth, whatever, have a shower, have breakfast, you go to work. Maybe you'll skip some of those things if you're running a bit late, but we never do that. It's literally, it becomes a habit. So, in terms of, I guess, just quickly, the roles that you have within Agile, whether you're being a product owner, you have to know this stuff, I think, to appreciate why the team can go so fast. Because if the team can go fast, they're going to deliver more, and that's what you want as a product owner. In terms of delivering the right stuff, because I know there was a thing about return on investment. Yes, we do that as part of our draft picks to understand the return on investment. Any questions?
Maybe at this point we can just pause and thank Justin and Jacob for sharing all that. That's wonderful. Thank you, guys.
It went way too long again. I'm going to have to cut my section down.
Well, I think you were answering questions as they came up. Is like
I know.
Instant messaging kind of vibe going on there, right? Just monitoring everything constantly. But yeah, does anyone have a further question you'd like to ask that hasn't already been covered? Might just spend 5 more minutes for those that can stay with us, but to anyone that needs to drop off, thank you. I've got a question or two. I'll just pick one maybe. I'm just curious about the org structure, because I know, you mentioned the QA team and them doing quite substantial amounts of automation work. Just wanted, what the kind of thinking was, but around that sort of structure. It sounds like there's sort of separate teams around different parts of your payments and various different concerns in your product. And because one thing I bump into quite a bit is testing teams getting out of sync with the development. Maybe if they're not testing a different version of they're kind of maybe creating test cases where the developers don't necessarily appreciate them or understand them or kind of trust and all of that, or it's not really kind of relevant to what the developers are thinking, especially ones that support development, I guess. But yeah, what's your thinking about the structure there and how that works for you?
Yeah, so our teams essentially are like product owner, a dev lead, maybe a senior or two, a junior developer, and then a QA automation engineer. So the QAs are on the teams. They're not like a separate team where we throw it over the fence and then it comes back in a few days' time. The team just delivers the whole thing. And then, like Jacob said, is sometimes the developers will actually help out, do some of the automation as well when the test is getting smashed. Because the good thing about testers is they do have a different mindset. They will find things that developers don't, and and I know that it's different. Again, at Atlassian, right? Like they don't have any QAs at all; just the developers do the whole lot. So different trains of thought, but that's what works for us. The other thing is, all the developers here in Wollongong report to me. I'm not a fan of having them report to the lead, which I know I have worked at companies where they do that. But I just think it changes behaviors, and I just prefer the flat structure, and then somebody that can focus on the people side of things, and then you've got the leads that focus on the technical side of things. So yeah.
Like also on the QAs being embedded in the team, and I see Tom's comment about like there was a paper that said separate testing teams result in lower quality. Like I think the other thing for us, and potentially, I don't know if the other teams are doing it this way, but like we start testing on the same day we start developing. That's just what we do, and that's like it wasn't always that way. We've kind of as the team worked towards that. But on day one, we have something that's testable, and we're aligning on that and saying, cool, like what can we have today that's tested? And that's just ingrown in us, I guess. So shifting that testing left so that it's not that handover of testing really helps.
Thank you. That's great.
There was a question up
Did
there,
anyone else?
Tom. There was a question on sync code reviews versus pull requests. I'm assuming that's like doing a code review, like in person, like just walking through the code. Like either or is fine, I think. Like I'd still do a pull request only because you've got the I guess the history of what was changed and all the rest of it. We obviously you would use Bitbucket and all the tools there, but it doesn't matter if you're using GitHub or whatever. But like if you can do it together, then fine. I think it's it's probably better sometimes than doing it as a pull request, because reading somebody's code just via little snippets here and there can often be really, really difficult.
If you're doing pull requests, how often are you out sitting out? Oh, sorry, how long are you sitting out on a branch for a typical piece of work?
Yeah, that's a really important question, right? Like, I'll start with what I was originally going to say, because it kind of leads into that, and that's like pull request shouldn't be the first time you hear about the solution or see the code. Like there should always be the conversation, and if you're having the conversation, then you've already had kind of the sync code review, and you're already across kind of what's happening in the pull request. And I think like that kind of comes to the next part of your question of how long does code sit in a branch, and it's not long because we've already had the conversation, and blockers are the biggest problem, right? So as soon as something's sitting in code review, it's blocked. It's not actually doing anything, so it becomes a priority for the team. And yeah, like that's just how our team operates, and it works really well for us. I think if the biggest, I don't know, I'd be really frustrated if my code was sitting out in a code review for ages and not getting looked at, because you just lose context of what you're working on, which isn't helpful.
But then you get all the merge conflicts, and then that takes you another bloody day in as well. So the smaller and the quicker you can put them in, you just do it.
What other teams I was working with, we agreed no long-lived branches. And I said, cool, so I can write a script that will automatically delete the branches if they're a week old, and they looked horrified.
Well, our CTO, he'll sometimes go into our backlog, and if there's anything in the backlog older than 6 months, he just deletes them.
Right.
So that's another way to keep your backlog nice and clean. Because the thing is stuff that's been there for that long, it's probably, the requirements are probably different now anyway. And if it's high enough a priority, then people can rethink it and do it. There's no reason to have that just cluttering your backlog.
I just thought of a great saying: backlog pruning is better than backlog grooming.
Yep. Good one. I like that. I'm going to steal that. DevSecOps. Yeah, we haven't had anyone rotate through. We have, I guess, had one girl or lady sort of, she was doing our releases as a release manager and is now in that team and getting learning in that way because she's very interested in that stuff. But look, the teams sit very close to each other, and so I guess the devs learn a lot through that. So all of the devs, yeah, they know what they're doing when they go into AWS. If they have to do something themselves on a dev side of things, obviously we don't let them touch, production. But then again, all of our infrastructure is either, terraformed or, there's probably a tiny little bit in Kubernetes and stuff like that. But it's all, again, just code, infra as code. And, there's some things that we let the devs do and there's some things that we don't.
Great. I was tempted to jump in on the back of that feature branch conversation, if that's all right.
Yeah,
just quickly, have you considered moving away from feature branches and just having commits to the mainline and doing reviews, small batch reviews of committed code, like that full on continuous integration? If not, like, what are the sort of inhibitors in people's minds to going quite that degree?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
We've thought about it.
We have, like, it's always a conversation. But I think, like, especially
yeah, I'll go. I think the most critical thing that I think of normally is it is a bit of a change in mindset. And I think some people are would be better at it than others. And that's where I think the whole organization has to change their mindset when it comes to doing something like that, because we're going to start trialing some. We actually already have a lot of our services, the microservices in the services layer. When you check it in, they automatically go into staging, just straight away. But I think that's after it goes into develop. I think, yep. So, but going all the way into production, I think that's where, there's a bit of that. You need to make sure you're doing a bit of feature flagging potentially, or we've got our own, like, what we call experiments API, where we can do that feature flagging. And it's just a different mindset I think that people need to have, because they need to know that, okay, it's going to be okay to push this off if I can just turn it off quickly or revert quickly. And I'm just not sure that we're there yet, but I do want to try and move into that direction. And we're going to trial it on one of the services soon, where we do go all the way into production, because I know there's one of our other, senior devs that's very passionate about it.
Okay, thanks. Sorry that Tom had a question.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So I'm a very big fan of trunk-based development instead of feature branches. But basically my experience with Australian FIs, and I'm not sure if this applies to you because you mainly work in Southern Europe, but from a auditability and segregation of duties point of view, it wasn't possible. Basically, any sort of regulated, heavily regulated industry, you have to do pull requests effectively, is where we ended up. We tried all sorts of ways of getting around it, but in the end of the day, it was just, there was no way.
I know, like at the big banks, like I think it's actually regulated by APRO or something like that, where, like testers, the developers can't test the code. Like, it's just crazy. So that's where
it's basically two people need to be involved in any process for delivering code into the production.
That's right. Okay. Yep.
And so if you've got the ability to push to main, and you've got continuous delivery, which do you want, continuous delivery or trunk-based development? You pick.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather have continuous delivery.
Yep. We don't have those constraints yet, but
nice.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Thanks for
we'll
sharing
see.
that, Tom. That's really insightful.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
good. Yep.
Hey, is anyone
There was
sitting
a
on
question
a
about the
burning
CTO.
question?
There was a question
Yeah.
about the CTO leaving. The CTO is the co-founder, so I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But yeah, I know what you mean, though.
All right. I think we might call it a night. Hey. So
Yep.
yeah, everyone, thank you so much, Justin and Jacob. Thank you for
That was
sharing.
fun. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, that was great and like very interactive too. Obviously unique with all those questions and how you reacted to them from
And
the previous iteration.
yeah, feel free to reach out if you've got any further questions directly, just via LinkedIn or some other way of finding me and Jacob.
Cool.
Thanks
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining.
Cheers.
See you next
No
time.
worries. Cheers.